Welcome to this YouTube video that we were able to put together thanks to our partnership with Bill Wynne at GoffstownToday.com. We hope you enjoy what you're about to see.
We can talk about the vice presidential debate last night. We talked about that in our opening segment. But Project Veritas came to New Hampshire, went to our polling places, and using the names of dead people who were on the ballots in Manchester and other communities, were able to successfully obtain ballots. Now, every time they were offered a ballot, we have to be technical about this, every time they were offered a ballot, they refused to take it, instead saying something to the effect of, oh, let me go to my car and get my ID. I really don't mind doing it. And that was important because the poll workers didn't do anything wrong, but what they did was say, oh, you don't need your ID to vote, which was true in New Hampshire. You don't need your ID to vote. And despite them saying, oh, I'll go get it. Oh, you don't have to go get it. Don't worry about it. You can vote. You just have to tell us who you are. We'll mark you off the checklist. See, now, you think that voter fraud doesn't exist in a situation like that, and yet I was 9 or 12 different polling places offered ballots to people claiming to be dead. I think there were 2 or 3 places where the poll workers either knew the person or something, but they caught it. They knew something was up, and they didn't offer the ballot. But 9 to 12 did. Now, I want to tell you something. We here in New Hampshire think that we are lily white and pure as the driven snow when it comes to whether or not our elections are corrupt. And maybe compared to some, we are lily white and pure as the driven snow. I think generally speaking, the people here in New Hampshire have an honest ethic about them. However, in a system that is governed by laws that says you don't have to show identification, you don't even need to show proof of your address. You can sign the purple piece of paper that says, oh, yes, I absolutely am John Smith, and I absolutely live at 123 ABC Street. Absolutely. Yes, that's me. Now, if you used a fake name and you used a fake address and you aren't from here, what good is the affidavit? What good is the attempt of the Attorney General or the Secretary of State to track you down? Well, in New Hampshire now, we send a letter to everybody who signs an affidavit. So what do you do when it comes back undeliverable, return to sender? Do you figure out that you just got screwed and that someone who isn't a citizen of your state and does not live under the laws that the people who get elected voted? Now, I can tell you stories. I have written newspaper columns about this. I can tell you stories of my time standing at polling places, actually helping to register people during a presidential campaign where the line was backed out the door. And we called the city clerk's office and said, hey, there's a bunch of us here that'd be willing to drop our signs and go in as deputy registrars if you want. They said, oh, please. And we cleared out the line. But you know how many purple pieces of paper? I was allowed to ask for ID. I was allowed to ask for proof of residence. But if they didn't have it,
they could still vote.
They could sign the purple piece of paper. I was forced to give them a voter registration form, and they could go take that, and they could go vote. Damn it. I know people who work at the polling places in Londonderry telling me during the Democrat primary between Obama and Clinton, they had people now this is Londonderry. They had people going to them who did not speak English. They spoke it as Spanish, saying, which one, Hillary Clinton?
Espanol.
Which one, Hillary Clinton? That's all they knew how to say. Which one, Hillary Clinton? In Londonderry. You would think we had a little Havana community down there with the numbers that I was told went through. Which one, Hillary Clinton? So let me tell you something, folks. You might not think that dirty tricks are at work here in the state of New Hampshire, but ask yourself this. In the state of Massachusetts, where virtually every election is a foregone conclusion, and the unions and the Democrats have their little brothers and sisters here in New Hampshire whose politics are the same as theirs, but whose electorate is a little different. Do you really think it's above them to try to wreak havoc with the elections? Especially when it comes to the federal years, you've got congressional seats. What would you rather have if you were a big labor? Carol Shea Porter and Annie Custer, or Charlie Bass and Frank Ginta? Those are said to be close races. Couple hundred votes, couple thousand votes, not beyond the realm of possibility. That could throw it. And here you have in the state of New Hampshire, out-of-state college kids demanding the right to vote in a place they refuse to be residents of. They will not register their cars. They will not get a driver's license. They will not do what everybody else has to do to establish themselves as a resident, but they demand the right to vote. That's like me walking into your house as a guest and telling you that you have to change the color of the paint on your wall. And oh, by the way, you have to hire Kathy from Kathy's Creative Painting to do it, because she's my friend. I'm not going to live there. But I'm going to tell you the color of the wall and the kind of carpet you're going to put up. Why? Well, because I'm a guest in your home, and I should have the right to be comfortable in your home, shouldn't I? Listen, I was an out-of-state college kid. You know what I did? I contacted my city clerk's office and asked for an absentee ballot to vote in the local elections of the place where I lived. The place I went home to when I wasn't in school. The place where I worked when I wasn't in school. The place I was coming back to when I graduated from school. But no, we've got out-of-state college kids found by the American Civil Liberties Union and the League of Women Voters. My God, how far has that organization fallen? That they would actually recruit college kids who are not and will not be New Hampshire residents to go into our courts to sue our state to overturn our laws that said if you live somewhere else, vote there, because the people who live here have the right to elect the people who write the rules that govern the people who live here.
See, we don't have to worry about this anymore because we have Obamacare now, so nobody's going to die anymore.
Oh.
We don't have to worry about dead people.
Well, they might not. All right, so we have got this. Now, I want to set the stage for this before Secretary Gardner comes in, because I think this is a very important part of the discussion that everybody misses. And we here at Girard at Large, until Project Veritas, are the only ones who have brought it up, at least in local media, and that is this. What everybody misses on this question of allowing out-of-state college students to vote in New Hampshire elections. Kids who are not residents, they do not get in-state tuition. They can't because they're not residents, but somehow they get to go vote in New Hampshire elections, as if we're depriving them of the opportunity to vote. Well, we're not, because as Ovid Lamontagne said in a statement, you know what? You can vote by absentee where you live, right? So what's to prevent one of these kids? And let's face it, if they're going to vote in a place that they aren't live, they're acting dishonestly. And that has a ripple effect. You know, they're not just doing it for president or maybe even Congress. It has a ripple effect. They're going to go vote straight Democrat ticket or whatever ticket it is they're going to vote. What's to say that they're not also filling out that absentee ballot and voting at home? And don't tell me if they're going to figure out how to vote in a place they don't live, they know how to vote in the place they're from.
Now, is this the one from Texas that you're...
Right. So well, it wasn't just Texas. But so here's the deal. Project Veritas ran a sting operation.
Well, they've run several of them, right?
Yes, and I'm going to try to narrate through this. Steve, you're going to have to give me some. We have some great audio. It's about 6 minutes. We're going to play it. But the crux of the problem was this: there were people who were taking voter registration forms from registration workers, from poll workers, to take to their friends and fill out. And there were people who were openly talking about and being encouraged and helped by paid Democrat Party officials in Houston, Texas. They were paid staff members of the Democrat National Committee in Houston, Texas, encouraging, teaching, helping them to not only vote in Texas, but to vote absentee in Florida, where the people presenting themselves said they no longer lived but still had a voter registration card. So I want you to hear this. It's about 5 or 6. It's just over 6 minutes. And where we need to chime in and narrate, I will pause and narrate, okay? And this is all before Secretary Gardner comes in. And Secretary Gardner brought these concerns up, by the way, in his testimony to the Supreme Court. So here we go. Obama re-election campaign headquarters in Houston.
Texas headquarters of Organizing for America, the community organizing arm of the campaign to re-elect President Obama. She told the regional field director she spoke with she was registered in both Texas and Florida and wanted to vote twice in order to help re-elect the president. According to FEC disclosure documents obtained by Project Veritas, the director we caught on tape is in fact a salaried employee of the DNC.
So I spent some time in Florida, and I got my voter registration card for Florida. So, and I know that we have, it's a battleground state there. So
keep it. So you're gonna vote? Vote by ballot.
I'm gonna vote by ballot, and then I have mine here too. It really concerns me that if we don't do everything we can, we're not gonna win.
So you're
this election.
Okay, so you have to make sure, because after 60 days you can send in your application to vote by mail ballot.
Okay.
So I can print that out for you.
Okay.
On Wednesday I'll print it out. You just have to mail it back in. Or fax.
Or fax it back in so that I could do.
So they'll send you a mail ballot.
And there's no way that they would be able to cross-reference that
I voted twice?
Yeah.
I'm not my expertise.
Okay.
I would just do Florida, because in Texas it really doesn't.
That's probably true. And let me know about that. I mean, I don't want to do anything wrong, but if no one's gonna know,
I'll definitely look into it.
Yeah.
I don't want you to get in trouble at all.
Yeah, I don't want to get in trouble, but like I said, if no one's gonna know, I don't have a problem with it. Yeah. So, anyway,
oh my God, this is so funny. It's cool though.
A few weeks later, our undercover reporter met with the same director again, who gave her a Florida absentee ballot application to help her vote twice, while telling her that if anyone checks, to say, quote, "I don't know."
But I was going to see, as far as all the registering for Florida, where do I get the forms to do that? Or not registering, but voting in Florida for the absentee?
So what you'll have to do is you're going to call into Florida.
Okay.
And call... Are you going to do what I think you're going to do?
Well, I mean, if no one's going to know.
You're so weird. Okay. I'm just going to print this out for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I have several friends who've done that, and they said that it's no problems. Plus...
But come up with, if anyone says
Well, just because, I mean, I don't know, it's so important. Everything that we're doing here is so important that there's absolutely no way, if I have an opportunity to make my voice heard, I'm going to make my vote twice. I'm going to make it heard twice, so.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay. And so then all I do...
I'm not quite sure, actually.
Oh, there's instructions up here. By mail. Okay. I'll figure it out. Excellent. No problem. No problem. I know, we can totally do this.
We can do it.
All right.
If you have any problems with the
Okay, I definitely will. All right, you too. Bye-bye.
That wasn't the only exchange we recorded. We visited Organizing for America voter registration tables around New York and Organizing for America headquarters around the country.
No, I'm from Minnesota, so I'm gonna vote there.
Oh, you're gonna vote in Minnesota? Okay, you have to register there then.
I'm probably gonna vote in both too, no matter what.
Okay, well, makes total sense.
Okay, I'm gonna vote in
Makes
both
total
places,
sense.
probably. So Mitt Romney does not take New York and Minnesota, right? 3 buttons, 3 votes. Could I take this with me? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are voter registration forms.
And don't need a postage.
And there's already,
cool.
you don't have to add a stamp to it either.
Okay. Can I have a couple for my friends as well? We're all going to make sure Mitt Romney doesn't win Minnesota or New York.
There you go.
We have to vote often, vote.
Yep, exactly.
So, thank you. I'm going to vote there.
You're gonna vote in Minnesota.
And probably here as well. Don't tell anybody.
Okay.
It's okay.
I know.
If you register now, I'll hand it in for you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I collect them all. I bring them to the Secretary of State's office.
Okay.
And that way you don't have to be bothered with the stamp or getting it in or whatever.
That's
the Democrat
knowing
says
voter
he wants
fraud
to vote
right
twice. He is told to take as many voter registration forms as he likes.
Can I take a couple with me?
You can. You can take as many as you want with
Okay,
you.
all right.
When a Republican tries to legally register other Republicans to vote, he is told that the voter registration forms are, quote, valuable.
Can I take a couple of
You
these
take
with
a couple.
me?
I need them. They're valuable, but you can take a couple.
Okay.
Yeah. She traveled from the stars just to show me how it's going down.
Yeah. So, there you have a disturbing 6 minutes of audio where Project Veritas, in multiple locations, not only uncovered a paid employee of the Democrat National Committee, who, by the way, apparently in wake of this has been put on leave or some such thing in Houston, Texas, encouraging and facilitating people committing voter fraud, voting in two places, her former state of Florida, where she's still registered, a battleground state, in Texas, where Obama has got no chance of winning. Yes, the regional field director, Stephanie Caballero, has been let go by the DNC. They have fired her. I don't think that's good enough, though. Anyway, and then all Organizing for America, that is, well, let's just say they're not out there looking for Republicans.
Isn't that the reformation of Acorn?
Yep.
Thank you. That's what I thought.
That's the reformation of Acorn. That is Obama's former group for which he used to community organize states all over the country, shutting them down for rampant voter fraud. Right there, on video, on audio, giving multiple registration forms to multiple people, encouraging multiple balloting in multiple states. And we sit here in New Hampshire and think we're immune to this after this same organization came to our state and was able to obtain ballots in the names of dead people.
I had a little brush with Acorn myself. On 2008, on Election Day, I had three ladies knock at my door. This is when I was still living on the west side. Knocked on my door, and they said, "Well, we're here to give you a ride to the polls so you can vote today." So, right away, I was suspicious. Okay, I think I know who these folks are. I said, okay, that's great. Let me just get my coat, because I was actually literally just getting ready to go out to vote. This is late morning. And I said, okay, I'm voting for John McCain. Is that okay? You would have thought I stole their purses. All three ladies kind of looked at each other and literally turned around and walked out my hallway door without saying a word.
Really?
True story.
To be fair, Dave.
My mother witnessed it.
To be fair, Dave, you did grab their purses, didn't you?
My mother laughed and said, that must have been Acorn. I said, do you think? Do you think? So don't tell me these people are not biased in who they lean towards.
Yes. So, but here and here in New Hampshire, here is the problem. We have. Come on in. Take a seat. So here in New Hampshire, we have this ongoing controversy because the state of New Hampshire passed this legislation. And the thing that really grabs me about this legislation, we'll talk to the secretary about this. The thing that really grabs me about the legislation, it doesn't even, at the end of the day, require somebody to produce an ID before they can vote. Now, they get this dizzying range of IDs that are acceptable, including a student identification. Great. You know what? I still have my student ID. It just says I went to Boston College. It doesn't say I lived in Brighton, Newton, or anywhere else in the area.
I don't think you'd be able to pass that off to anybody today, though.
Well, maybe not. But here's the deal. So this conversation with Secretary Gardner, the guardian of the New Hampshire primary, is a timely one because of what's happening in our state, but what's happening across the country with willful, coordinated assaults on voter laws. We are pleased to be joined not only by Secretary Bill Gardner, New Hampshire's Secretary of State, but by two of his legal eagles. It's Adrian Forcier,
La Rochelle.
Adrian La Rochelle, and
Eric Forcier.
Eric Forcier. I had all four names. They were just in the wrong order. And you two gentlemen are attorneys with the Secretary of State's office, correct?
Yep, we are.
All right. Any relationship, by the way, to the La Rochelle, who's the pastor of my church?
No.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
And we, as our listeners know here, Secretary Gardner, we have almost since the time we've been on the air, have been talking about voter registration in New Hampshire, the voter ID bills that have worked their way through the legislature, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a topic that is near and dear to us. And of course, it's taken a strange and bizarre turn with the out-of-state students challenging our right as a community to say, sorry, you actually have to be one of us to vote. So what I think would be a good place to start the conversation is with that court case. And then from there, maybe build the backdrop that our audience can understand how voter laws in New Hampshire do work, what this legislation does, and what your thoughts on or what legislation is needed and what it should do. So I'll give you the opportunity first, of course, to introduce yourself to our listeners. You probably need no introduction, but we'll ask you to do that.
Well, good morning, Rich. Good morning, listeners. This particular court case was filed. There were four petitioners, four students. One has a driver's license from Massachusetts, one from Maine, one from Connecticut, and one from Nebraska. And the argument that they have made to the court is that they do not believe that they're going to stay in New Hampshire. They are not, once they finish their schooling here. And in a couple cases, it's going to be next spring, and in one case, it'll be in the year 2015.
So they're admitting that they're guests in the state. It's like me going to your house for dinner, and knowing I'm not going to stay there, calling myself, saying that's my home because I'm a guest.
What they're saying is that their current intent right now is to leave the state when they finish school. That's their current intent right now. That conflicts with the voter registration form, because on the voter registration form there is an affidavit that every person registering to vote must sign. And that affidavit says that it is the person filling out that form, it is the person's current intent to make this state and the city or town that the person is registering in their domicile. Their domicile to the exclusion of any other domicile that they may have.
Now, for people like me who aren't exactly sure what domicile means, what does it mean and why is it important?
Domicile is the place that a person says is his or her home. It is the person where, upon a temporary absence, the person will return to. So a person who says that this is now my home here in Manchester, and when you fill that form out, you are saying that it is your current intent, it's your decision to make this now your home to the exclusion of all other places. Now, you could have multiple residences. You could have a home up in the mountains that you spend in the winter because you like to ski, and you can have a home on the seashore that you use in the summer, and you can have a home in 2 or 3 other places. But it is the person's choice to decide which one of those is his or her domicile. And that's the key here, because the domicile is the place that you're saying that's where you spend the most time, but you can only have one. So once you say that this is now my domicile, you are excluding all other places. The conflict here is that this isn't about voting. This issue that's been in court is about the process of becoming a registered voter. And when you fill out that form, you are required to say that as part of an affidavit. Now, the form itself had been changed back in 2003 because a federal law was passed called the Help America Vote Act. It was passed in 2002, ostensibly because of what happened in Florida. The Congress and the President signed it, and it required that every single state in the country, if you register to vote now in any state and you have a current and valid driver's license, you must put that driver's license number and the state of issuance on the voter registration form. So picture individual coming in to vote. These four, for instance, out-of-state driver's licenses, they are required to put it on our voter registration form. It's confusing because it makes individuals think that using an out-of-state address and an out-of-state driver's license is part of the official way of becoming a registered voter in New Hampshire. And it's the same across the country. If somebody wanted to register in another state and they have a New Hampshire driver's license, they've got to use that driver's license as part of the voter registration process. So the legislature decided in 2003 that to clear up any confusion with this, they were going to add to the voter registration form a section in the affidavit that says that now that you have claimed your domicile right now, your current intent, this means something. It means that you are stating that this is your home, this is where you live, and you are subject to all the laws of the state. And here's an example. You must get a New Hampshire driver's license within 60 days and a motor vehicle registration within 60 days. Now, the form actually says you are subject to all the laws of the state, and you are subject to these two in particular. And the legislature decided in 2003 to include the motor vehicle because it made the most sense, because on the line just before the affidavit is where you have to put your driver's license. And this will help people who are registering on Election Day. In 2008, we had 76,755 Election Day registrants in this state.
Oh, my God.
We have now on the checklist 793,000, 150,000 plus, less than we did in 2008 because we had a purge. Every 10 years we have to do a purge, and we did it last year in 2011. So my guess is we could have upwards of 100,000 individuals in this state registering on the spot at the polling place on presidential election day. And to try to prevent there from being a lot of questions from individuals saying, well, what does this affidavit really mean? What does it mean to be domiciled? And it's to prevent that so that they don't have to ask all these questions related to that to local election officials because they don't have time on presidential election day. We had 719,000 individuals voting in 2008, and we're going to have at least that same number this time. And you couple that with the voter registration process going on at the same time, election officials can't deal with this. That's why this decision by the court has such an effect across the state, because we not only have this issue now, but we have the brand new voter ID issue. And putting the two together, I never thought that we would have a court case on the voter registration form.
So this is a court case on the voter registration form, not on the fact that not on the question of having to provide identification.
Right, but people are getting this confused. As a matter of fact, in the media, a lot of the stories have about the court case they've talked about it in terms of the voter ID issue, and this is not about voter ID. But just think of it. We don't like to have anybody wait in line for more than 10 minutes at an election in this state. And we have tried to do everything that we can to make sure there's enough booths for people to vote in, that we don't have the line. But if there's going to be a lot of questions at the voter registration table, there's going to result in lines. And a presidential election anyway is a difficult one because there are a lot of people in this state and across the country that only vote every 4 years in a presidential election. 2 years ago, the state election, we had 460,000 voters participate. 460,000. The midterm election 4 years before that, we had 410. The presidential, we had almost 300,000 more. And each presidential is like that. It's between 250 and 300,000 additional voters. So there's a lot going on that day. And so the intent of the legislature was to try to provide as much information as possible on that form to prevent people from having to ask these questions and to say to these registrants, it means something. When you declare your domicile, you are saying that this is your home. And since this is your home, you need to understand that you are subject to the laws of this state. If you're going to be choosing the individuals who make the laws that we all live under, and if you're going to be deciding whether we amend our Constitution, the fundamental structure of our government, if you're going to be participating in that decision-making, then you need to understand that you have a stake in this place, that you can't be someone who is saying you cannot fill out that form and say that your current intent is to be domiciled here. This is your domicile. That's what you say. But then say, well, I don't really mean that. It's not like that. Now, it doesn't mean that a week later something changes in your life or 2 months later. We're not saying that you have to stay here forever, but we're saying that when you fill that form out, you are saying at that point in time that this is your home. And what the judge said was it was too chilling on these individuals to put in the form that this information about the driver's license. And the legislature didn't do it to hinder anybody from voting. They did it to help those individuals understand what it meant to say, to sign that affidavit and to say that this is my intent at this point in time.
And so the heart of the current controversy is 4 out-of-state college students who refuse to agree that they are domiciled here in New Hampshire, want to vote here in New Hampshire, presumably because they're domiciled or they've said somewhere else is their home. They could also vote there and nobody would be the wiser. So we're also trying to protect one man, one vote for people who want to register here but don't want to live here.
Well,
did I have that basically right, Mr. Secretary?
When they say they're domiciled here, they are saying, and the form says this, to the exclusion of all others. So at that point in time, wherever they came from, wherever they have their driver's license from, they're saying at this point in time, I'm no longer domiciled there. I am domiciled here because I want to vote here.
See, and when I went to college, I always understood Manchester as my home. I always intended to come back, and I always did something radical, Mr. Secretary. I always voted absentee. We are with Secretary of State Bill Gardner and 2 attorneys from his office. We have Adrian LaRochelle and Eric Forcier here with us. We're going to get them into the conversation shortly. If you have questions or comments for the Secretary on this issue, you're welcome to call us at 672-0573. That's 672-0573. Bill, during the break, you were mentioning that you actually have personal experience, not just as Secretary of State, but actually being on site in a polling place during the 2008 presidential election, and witness firsthand the confusion that voters have. Why don't you share that situation with us?
Well, at the last presidential election, when I walked into my polling place, Ward 2 in Manchester, one of the election officials at the voter registration table saw me and asked me if I'd come over because there were 3 young individuals there who had some questions about whether they should actually fill out the voter registration form, whether they were domiciled. So as I walked over, I asked what question did they have, and one of them said, well, I'm really not sure if I should be able to vote here today, and but I've seen this voter registration form, and I don't really understand domicile. And unlike 2004 presidential election, when we had the information about a driver's license, the legislature in 2007 took it out, and the legislature this past year
put it back in.
So in 2008, it wasn't in. So when I went over, I said, okay, why are you having this discussion? And this one person said to me, well, I wanted to vote. I'm from Washington State, and I really want to vote in this presidential election, but I missed the deadlines to get the absentee ballot in my state, and I was told that I could just come and vote here.
Oh.
So I said, well, what?
Does she understand the Electoral College, this one?
I didn't have time to get into the
I know,
Electoral
I know.
College, but so I said, "Are you? Do you feel that you live here now?" And she said, "Well, I'm from Washington State." And I said, "Well, how long have you been here, and how long are you going to be here?" And she said, "I'm leaving next month because I'm in AmeriCorps. My term is up, and I'm going back home." And I said, "Well, that should be your answer." And she decided that she wasn't going to do it. But then the two others with her convinced her that she didn't know for sure if she was going to be going back next month, and that she ought to just do it because she really wants to vote. So she filled out the form. The three of them went over, and I just stood there and watched this. The three of them went over and got in line to get a ballot. And a few seconds after she got in line, she turned and she went back to the voter registration table and said, "I don't want to do this," and did not ask to have her registration form discarded. And so there's an example.
Did the other two vote?
The other two voted. The other two voted. And they, but the point is that on that day, a lot of people are going to be making this decision on the spot. And that's why it's helpful, not a hindrance, it's helpful to have as much information on that voter registration form as possible.
Now, will that information be on the voter registration form for the presidential election this November?
At this point in time, no.
And is that because of the order of the Stratford County judge, whose name escapes me at the moment?
Yes, it's the...
So that judge has issued an order that has stricken that information from our registration forms. And now is that now at the Supreme Court, correct?
Well, it was at the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court agreed about 2 weeks ago now that they were going to take original jurisdiction. But the Supreme Court issued earlier this week an order that they are not going. It was a 3-2 vote, and they are not. They don't believe. This is what they said, that they have enough time between at that point and the general election to get to the merits of this complicated issue. And
a complicated issue?
And that there wasn't enough time, they felt. And by a 3-2 vote, they decided to allow the judge, that single judge, that decision to stand for this election, and that this would all be litigated after the election.
So the Supreme Court said, now what does it mean when it takes original jurisdiction?
Well, it was going to sort of start.
So it was going to try the case.
Yeah.
So it was going to try the case, and now it said, all right, we're going to try the case, but we're not going to do it until after the election because we somehow, as the Supreme Court of the state of New Hampshire, can't navigate the issues involved with whether or not people are domiciled in what period of time?
They didn't have enough time. That's what the order said.
How long did the judge in Stratford County have?
A very, very short period of time. And the hearing that we had a week and a half ago, a lot of what he said during that hearing was acknowledging that the Supreme Court was going to take this, so he was going to be deferring other decisions. The one decision that he made a week ago was to take down what he ordered that we put on our website having to do with this issue. We had to take down what was on our website and put up something that he ordered us to put up. I was very unhappy with that because I felt that what he ordered us to put up was actually illegal. What was being said in that order, what we had to put on our website was illegal. But we put it up because it was a court order. But at the hearing a week ago,
but you put it up with a disclaimer saying
that I'm putting this up only as long as we are forced by a court order to put it up. But he ordered us
to take it
down a week ago. So we had what we had up there. We had to take it down and put that order up. That was up for about a week. And then we took that down, and now we've got back what we had originally. And it's just, this is really not the time to be dealing with an issue like this. But the petitioners brought this after the primary, and what he ordered us to put up said out-of-state students do not have to get a New Hampshire driver's license based on their saying that they're domiciled in this state.
So basically he said that they can say they're domiciled without having to prove their domicile, without having to do what someone who is domiciled would have to do.
He said that domicile can be a domicile only for voting purposes, but for...
Oh, good heavens.
For nothing else.
All right. Well, that gives me the opportunity to bring Adrian La Rochelle into the conversation here. Adrian is an attorney with the Secretary of State's office, and apparently you've done a lot of research on what it means to be domiciled and what the rights and responsibilities of someone who claims their home in the state of New Hampshire are. So enlighten us.
Well, as Secretary Gardner mentioned, one of the issues in this case is that whether or not there is a domicile for voting purposes only. There's a lot of, obviously, arguments on both sides about that, but if you go through the New Hampshire statutes, there's really, the word domicile, the word resident appear throughout. I mean, some of the issues here are declaring your domicile by signing the affidavit on the voter registration form. You're saying, essentially, that New Hampshire is your only home. It's your only domicile to the exclusion of all others. That brings in...
It's the place where you're going to make your nest, not the place where you're going to visit on occasion.
Exactly. And when you do that, you're taking on the responsibilities of declaring New Hampshire as your domicile, and that includes licensing your dog. Chapter 466 of the revised statutes annotated talks about the licensing of dogs.
Licensing of dogs.
And I mean, it says...
See, we've talked about that here on the show.
Yeah.
Attention, Bedford.
It's a very pressing issue. And what the law says, essentially, is that if you own a dog 4 months old or older, you have to register that dog, license it, have it wearing its tag, in the city and town in which you live, in which the dog is kept. So even if you don't declare domicile through signing the voter registration affidavit, you still have to do that. So that's a responsibility just by keeping a dog in the state. Also, one of the RSAs I looked at, Chapter 77B, refers to something called the commuter's income tax.
Commuter's income tax.
Yeah, this is a tax that may be imposed on commuters into or out of New Hampshire. So under the chapter, in the definitions, resident shall mean an individual domiciled in the state except one who maintains a permanent place of abode outside the state, does not maintain one within the state, and does not spend more than 30 days of the taxable year within the state. And if this is the case, residents under this chapter may have to pay a 4% income tax on income made outside of the state if the state in which they're making that income doesn't impose an income tax. And non-residents, so even people who don't fall within the definition of resident under this chapter, earning income in New Hampshire may also have to pay an income tax. So I mean,
I'm not a legal eagle, but I think you just said that because of this judge's order, it's entirely possible that New Hampshire residents who work out of state and out of state people who work here just might start paying income taxes to other states.
I think the greater point here is that by signing this voter registration affidavit,
Bill, did you bring Irish coffee this morning?
By signing this affidavit, you are taking on a lot of responsibilities. You're not just declaring domicile for voting purposes. This has farther-reaching implications.
Mr. Secretary, or I don't know if Eric or Adrian would be better to answer this question, is it not true, before you came on, in preparation for having you come on the show this morning, I ran a audio and video of a sting operation done by Project Veritas in Houston and other places around the country, Organize America offices and Obama re-election headquarters in Houston, where they were actively encouraging people to take multiple registration forms without any supervision, oversight, telling them how they could fill them out, mail them in, actively encouraging people, and in fact helping them obtain absentee ballots from places where they had voter registration cards, like Florida. Isn't it true that one of the practical outfalls of this disastrous Stratford County court decision and the Supreme Court's apparent abdication of its responsibility to resolve this before the election? This is what fries me. You have the New Hampshire legislature that has acted decisively, and we have a court, one man, because of one petitioner, two petitioners, whatever the number is, toss aside the work of the people of New Hampshire done through its legislature. Is it not the case, though, that these out-of-state students, if they're allowed to vote here in New Hampshire, could also be voting by absentee ballot back in their actual state of residence? And what does that mean what does that mean to New Hampshire? The primary, our responsibility to make sure that we ensure in this state one vote, one person, one vote, one time in a hotly contested national election that will determine futures and fates for generations.
This case was brought by out-of-state students, but it has the effect.
Do they even have standing? How does an out-of-state student even have standing to come into our courts?
I think that they do not have standing. One of these individuals had registered to vote at the presidential primary, has voted twice since then. So this person in 1 year has voted 3 times and has filled out the voter registration form. Another one registered to vote 2 years ago, and 2 others have not registered at all. But this is the point. It would also include any other person in New Hampshire who is here on a temporary basis. Because if someone is saying, I don't intend to stay here, how can you fill that form out if in your mind you are saying to yourself, I don't intend to stay here? How can you make a domicile to the exclusion of all others and sign that, saying that that's what you're doing, but at the same time saying, but I don't really intend this. So a campaign worker can come in. Somebody who comes in to pick apples, or if it's in the wintertime, presidential primary, to ski. What's happening is
and this is not such a. I mean, certainly we're full of campaign workers here. So really, they've made it possible for any out-of-state campaign workers, of which we are awash in right now, to be able to vote at the polls. But here's a not so outlandish thing. What if you belong to a Massachusetts union and you're up here on a big job and you're staying here for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months? I know people who stay at hotels, stay at motels while they stay in the job, maybe commute home on weekends. So we're really saying that people who come out of state for a big job like that, under this law, under this ruling, can now go to the polling place in the state of New Hampshire and say, yep, I'm domiciled here just to vote, but nothing else, and then go home.
And because of what's been in the news, I'll give you an example. We had an email from the town clerk up in Moultonborough, somebody from California who read on the internet what was happening here, now wants to register to vote because they have a place that they spend some time in Moultonborough, and says in this, asked to be registered, and said that now that I know I can use my California driver's license, I want to be able to vote there.
David, I didn't. I should have brought the duct tape, Mr. Secretary. We got to take a quick break. I think I might actually need the Gorilla Tape, not the duct tape. Did you know there was such a thing? It's called Gorilla Tape. It's supposed to be extra sticky. I'm going to wrap it around my head.
They invented that just for you, Rich.
I don't want the pieces to go everywhere. All right, continuing now with Secretary of State Bill Gardner and 2 attorneys from his office, Adrian LaRochelle and Eric Forcier. Mr. Secretary, we had to hit the break, but before we were doing that, you were talking about an email received from a California resident with a summer place in Moultonborough who learned that he could use his New Hampshire's driver's license as a result, his California driver's license, as a result of this controversy, and wanted to register in Moultonborough so he could vote here, presumably in addition to his California residence.
He actually said that his vote, if he voted in New Hampshire, it would be 6 times more important than if he voted in California because of the nature of this state, and that his vote would particularly, I don't know if he meant the Electoral College because, or whether the campaign is...
Or because the voter pool here in New Hampshire is so much smaller, his vote is that much larger. Now,
I just wanted to say that campaign workers who are here, they come here, when they find that someone is supporting their candidate, they have the tendency to just say, just go do it, just go do it, just go do it. You can do it on election day. And that's part of why the legislature came up with some of this language in the affidavit, because there was a commission established in 2001, and multiple students who had registered to vote and then found out a day or a week or 2 weeks later that it meant something had actually come in and testified. And in an affidavit that I submitted to the court, we listed 10 of these individuals that had come to the legislature and said, please help us, give us as much information so that we know what this means. I had a town clerk talk to me about 8 or 10 years ago and said, I just had a student, this person, the clerk was from Hanover, I just had a student here at Dartmouth come to my office and blame me for the fact that he had just lost the scholarship that he had been given from Pennsylvania. And when you register to vote, one of the things, other pieces of information on the form, if you've ever been registered any other place, the last place that you've been registered, you're supposed to put that on. So, and by law, the local officials have to send it to any of the 6 New England states, not us, but the other 5. But they're encouraged to send it to other states. So they sent a copy to Pennsylvania where he had listed his previous voter registration address. Well, someone there got it and found out that knew that he had gotten a scholarship only because he lived in a certain geographic area of Pennsylvania. And when they found this out, he had to forfeit that scholarship. So he goes to the official who he registered with and said, this is your fault. You never told me. You didn't explain to me what this meant. I was led to believe that it didn't mean anything, that I could just come and vote and it had there'd be no ramifications of that. And so there's an example. And in this affidavit, there's a number of students that have similar stories that have happened that they didn't because they were led to believe. And when people come in and work on campaigns, they leave the state right afterwards. They don't really care what they say. And if you look at some of the pieces of information that they put out, they tell people it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything. Just go do it. You really want to vote? Don't do it. If you miss the deadline in the state that you live in because you can't get an absentee ballot, or you miss the voter registration deadline, just do it here because you really need to vote in this election as a presidential election. The point is you don't just vote for president. You can vote for everyone else on the ballot. Right. And
you were saying there were 76,000 plus that registered to
76,755 registered at the 2008 presidential election.
Right at the polling place, same day.
Same day, at that polling place.
12% of the overall voter turnout registered
almost
that day.
12%. And this time, because we had that purge and we took over 150,000 names off the checklist last year, a third of those people, and we've seen this in the past, we have a purge every 10 years ending in 1. About a third of them will come back at the next presidential election and register. So we could have upwards of 100,000. We had 76,000. It would not surprise me in the least that we have 100,000.
In a state with a lot of really close, hotly contested close races, it seems to me that having 10 or 12% of your population the voter turnout register the same day of an election just could affect an outcome.
And we had we can have 20 to 30 recounts after this election, typically after presidential elections. We had 28 the year that 2000, when all the news was about Florida. A lot of those contests are decided by less than 10 votes.
Yeah.
In the primary this time, we had a state rep race that ended in a tie, and it was decided at a recount by 1 vote. That's not uncommon, and it's not uncommon to have almost every election that I've administered has had a tie. Almost all of them have had at least one tie because we have contests with the 400-member House, the Senate, the Council. It's and there'll be contests this time that'll be 2 votes, 5 votes, 10 votes that will make the difference. And It was this language was an attempt to prevent there being harm to certain individuals, and it's by taking it out, it adds to the number of questions that these registrants are going to ask at the polling place, which will add to the weight that other people are going to have have that are there. And it all began after the September 11th primary.
There are two things that I want to get to here. In New Hampshire, what I don't understand about the Superior Court in Stratford's rush to invalidate this is, don't our laws, Eric or Adrian, you want to jump in on this, Mr. Secretary? Isn't the presumption of constitutionality of a law always taken in New Hampshire so that you don't find yourself under these these gun-imposed deadlines? It seems to me that the court has presumed that what the state legislature did was unconstitutional and therefore must be remedied or at least stopped before the constitutionality could be figured. Did they get it exactly backwards?
If you go back over time and you look at decisions of the Supreme Court, repeatedly the Supreme Court has said that the presumption of constitutionality is applied to an act passed by the legislature and the governor. So they presume it's constitutional until, after an argument on the merits, they conclude otherwise. In this decision, 3 of the justices said, no, we're not going to give the presumption of constitutionality. Two of the Chief Justice and the former Chief Justice of the Superior Court, who's now on the Supreme Court, said, we're going to be consistent with our past, that we're going to presume that it's constitutional, and so we're going to put a stay on this. We're going to stop this so that we can deal with this after the election because we don't believe there's enough time to get to the merits. But 3 of them said, we're going to put it off because we agree that there's not enough time to deal with it, but we're going to let the decision of the Superior Court judge stand for the election. And that decision was made in a few weeks. It might not have even been 2 weeks. And it was made at a hearing that the judge admitted at the reconsideration the major issues never even came up at the hearing that he made his first decision based on.
Well, how did he make his decision if, Eric, you were in the courtroom, how did he make his decision if the major issues didn't come up?
Well, he did, in his decision, he did mention that he did want to speak to Mr. Gardner and get more background on the issue. So that's why in the reconsideration, Mr. Gardner filed an affidavit which really outlined his position and outlined everything we're talking about today. And we'll be happy to provide that to you. And you can put it on your website. But he did give an opportunity for Mr. Gardner to come down and explain the legislative history and the background to this. So we did appreciate that. And Mr. Gardner put his thoughts together well in that affidavit. And we'll be happy to provide that to you.
And there was a very key part of this.
Now, did your affidavit go to the Superior Court or the Supreme Court? The affidavit that Eric was just talking about.
The affidavit went to the Superior Court on the reconsideration motion, asking him to reconsider. He did reconsider his order, having us put on our website something that should not have been put on there, and it has come down.
And it'll be part of the record for the Supreme Court as well.
But what happened at the beginning? The petitioners submitted to that judge what they said was the existing law, the definition of legal voter. And it was not the law. They submitted a sentence that is not in the law. And
so you're saying that the people who filed the suit represented something that
was not true.
Didn't exist as the law.
And the judge did not know. The
judge didn't know?
Well,
does the judge not read the laws that are submitted? Does the judge not do a little trust but verify thing there?
To be fair,
I wasn't off base when I said this guy should be impeached after that ruling came down.
To be fair, the judge mentioned at the reconsideration hearing that he was aware of the law change, and he pointed us to a place in his order where he claimed it was evident that he was aware of the law change. we somewhat disagree. We didn't really seem to see that it was clear in his order, but he did say at the reconsideration that he was aware of the law change. What had happened is on August 26, 2012, the legislature passed an amendment.
Not passed. They passed it in the spring.
Passed it in the spring, became effective on August 26, 2012, that struck a sentence, a very important sentence in the law, and that's what the petitioners relied upon in their petition, and we correctly pointed out in the reconsideration that that provision had been struck from the law.
Yeah, dear Judge, the law that you based your decision on no longer exists. Therefore, oh my God, just think of all of the stuff that a court could resurrect that had been stricken by a legislature if, in fact, it doesn't matter that it was stricken by the legislature. Is this for real?
Yeah, well, it is. But, I mean, and this language that was stricken was the basis for the argument that there is a domicile for voting purposes only.
So the petitioners came to court based on a law that didn't exist anymore, and the judge issued an order to change what you were about to do for the November election based on based on a law that no longer existed.
And the Supreme Court is not going to look at it in time.
And the Supreme Court just can't manage to get out of its way in time to look at it. Oh my God. I don't get this. We're gonna, I don't know if I want to do this or I just want to bring Al Caprillion on and hope that lightning's going to strike Concord. Or maybe Stratford County. Where's the courthouse? I'm not sure whether or not to laugh or cry. This is,
It's unbelievable.
This is the poster case for fact is stranger than fiction. You can't make this stuff up.
I don't think Rod Serling could have ever thought this stuff up.
All right. While we were talking during the break, Eric Forcier, who's one of the attorneys in the Secretary of State's office, brought up a very valid point that I would like him to make because it's going to springboard into how we want to close this out. For those of you tuned in for Al Caprillion, there is a whole lot of weather taking place here in this interview. The Secretary and his team has graciously agreed to stay to close it out. This is too important to leave hanging. And so we apologize to Al and to all who are tuned in for him. But you can get his complete weekend forecast at girardatlarge.com. And, of course, you can follow him on Twitter at Al Caprillion and follow him on our Facebook page because I believe the two are linked, but I don't even know that anymore. All right, so Eric, you mentioned something because, I was all bent out of shape over the idea that, out-of-state students could not only vote here in New Hampshire and affect potentially the outcome of our elections on any level, but also in their home state via an absentee ballot. And you very alarmingly corrected me and said, but that's not the real problem. So why don't you share with our listeners what the real problem is?
Well, I just wanted to make sure to clarify the fact that it's a crime to vote in two different places, and if people want to try to do that, it's going to be very difficult to stop that. What this issue is people being able to vote in New Hampshire. We're a swing state. We're a battleground state. People who are coming here on a temporary basis, like students, may choose to vote here because they feel like their vote would have more of an effect because we're a swing state. So I just want to be clear that it is a crime to vote in two different places, and this issue is more of where these people cast their ballot. It may make people who are here temporarily or students think it's okay to vote here. So it's not people who have the intention to vote in two different places. People may still try to do that, but the issue is more of people feeling like it's okay by this decision to vote here.
But if this stands, and this was the point that you made that scared me. If this stands, and New Hampshire can have basically domicile designation just for voting, we could wake up one day and find that we don't have 750,000 voters here in the state of New Hampshire. We could have 1 million. We could have 1.5 million, because there'd be nothing to prevent anybody from declaring New Hampshire as their home only for voting purposes. This fellow from California, there could be thousands. Look, the Free Staters came to New Hampshire and are coming to New Hampshire because we're a small enough state politically that they think by moving here and living here, they can affect an outcome here, right? So what's to say that this guy from California who sent an email isn't sort of the tip of a wave of people who are going to hear about this insanity? Even from our fellow New England states, everybody in New England knows this is going on, right? Who decide that, hey, New Hampshire's a place where my state always votes blue, and maybe I'd like New Hampshire to be blue too, or even flip it around. Maybe there's some reliably red states that know New Hampshire needs to stay red for whatever reason or think they do, and they'll register here and they'll vote here to help. What am I? So you're worried that we could double, triple the number of registered voters here without an increase in population?
That's exactly the point.
We have 1.3 million who live here, but we have 1.5 million who vote here. That's really possible under this. That's what you're saying.
And because we're an election day registration state, and we're the only one in the Northeast, and there are good reasons why we have election day registration.
Yeah, why
because
don't you explain that to us?
Well, we don't have to. When the National Voter Registration Act was passed
Motor
by
voter, right?
Motor voter in 1993, and that was the beginning of the linkage of motor vehicles with voter registration. But we were one of a half a dozen states that ended up being exempt from that law. And we were exempt from that law because the local officials in New Hampshire said, we would rather, and the only way to be exempt from it was to have election day registration. And they said, we would rather have election day registration to preserve the integrity of the voter registration process, because at least these individuals have to register in person with us. The motor voter law allows you to register in a town that you didn't live in. You could register on a national voter registration form. Independent groups, and we heard the stories about ACON, could go out there and register voters. And that is what led to the Florida problems in 2000. That National Voter Registration Act was 1993.
So the federal government came to help. It required the states to do something, gave them an out. We took the out.
We took the out, but the others did not take the out. So we didn't have these independent groups registering voters. And we saw what happened. If you registered in a party that group didn't want, they would throw away the registration. So you would show up at the polls and you weren't registered, and you would argue with. So that's why all these other states have provisional voting. And I am dead set against provisional voting because it's a double voting system. So we're exempt from provisional ballots because of it. So there were a number of reasons why that we have election day registration. But election day registration presents different issues to the people of this state. And one of the issues is if we had 76,000 election day registrants at the last presidential election, and we had a form that allowed there to be a number of questions, what it meant to fill that form up. This was an attempt to try to prevent that again. And now we're going to be back with a form, unless something happens in the next 4 weeks, with a form that tries to provide at least additional information to people. So, but think of that. We have that many people showing up to register at the same location. The parking spaces there, people that might be coming and seeing the lines, or they can't even get in, so they drive away. This suit has added a huge additional problem that
So, but it seems to me, though, in wake of motor voter, or the same day registration, that New Hampshire has got to be really careful about its registration process. It's got to be able to guarantee one person, one vote, one time, and now I'd add to it, one place. And it should be able to guarantee that the people who vote are the ones who they say they are and live where they say they live. And that gets us into another issue. But before we get there, it strikes me as odd, by the way. Again, I'm not a legal eagle, but I would think that if you're going to sue the state of New Hampshire, you'd be in Merrimack County Superior Court, which is where the state is domiciled, and not in Stratford County Court. How did Stratford County Court decide that it had jurisdiction in this matter if the state were being sued?
Well, there were 3 interveners that tried to intervene at the hearing that was held in Superior Court a week and a half or so ago. And that issue came up with these interveners. And at the beginning of the almost 3 hours that we spent in court, the judge said that he was not really going to allow these interveners. But then by the end of the hearing, he said he had changed. And he actually, one person who was addressing him when he said that about he didn't think he was going to be able to intervene, this person argued that his organization was sort of like the League of Women Voters, but had a different position on this, and he ought to be able to have his organization represented before the court if the League of Women Voters were represented before the court. And if it was because the League of Women Voters person was from Stratford County, if that was the argument why it was in Stratford County, he wanted to present his side of this issue. And when the judge denied that, he just took his folder and kind of slammed it together and said, "I'm out of here," and walked out of the room. And then a little later, the judge asked somebody if they knew him, would they try to bring him back? And he wasn't going to come back. And then by the end of the hearing, he said he's going to defer all these decisions on interveners because of the Supreme Court taking original jurisdiction.
And now the Supreme Court's not even going to hear the case before the election. That's just great.
But that issue of why it was in that court, one person actually got up in that courtroom, and that one person got up in that courtroom and said, "This is in this courtroom because these people wanted you to be the judge in this case."
Oh. I think a call needs to go to Speaker O'Brien. I think it's time to seriously investigate.
I think we need a sound effect for that one.
I think that's awful. All right, I do want to get to voter identification, Mr. Secretary. What is your position on whether or not residents of the state of New Hampshire should be required to provide a photo ID that proves they are who they say they are? And live where they say they live. Am I nuts to think that is not an imposition on any citizen of the state of New Hampshire?
Well, in this election, this is the beginning of a 3-year implementation of this. And in this election, in the primary in September, all you had to do was say that you were asked if you had an ID to show. And if you showed it, you were checked off. And if you didn't, there was a mark made that you did not have an ID, but you didn't have to show any identification.
How many people didn't show ID during that primary?
12,800. Now, my polling place, when I went in to vote, our polls open at 6 in Manchester. I got there about 7:15. I asked an election official how it was going, and they said there was a person who had just left just before I got there who went in. And when he was asked for an ID, he said, "That's it. I'm not ever voting again." And they said, "Well, wait a minute. You don't even have to show us the ID. We just have to ask you for it. You don't even have to show it." Nope, I don't care.
Well, good. That means the
fact that you asked me for this, I'm leaving. So there are some people that's their choice. That person didn't like the fact that he was actually being asked if he had an ID. In November, in this election, there's one more step. You're going to be asked to show an ID, and it has to be a government-issued ID, or it can be an ID that the local officials at the polling place feel is satisfactory to them, and it can be a student ID. And if you don't have, or they know you, one of the election officers know you. If you don't have if you're not known and you don't have any of that identification, you have to sign a very small piece of paper that says, "I am the person who I say I am," and you sign that, and that's it. So for this election in November, that is what you have to do if you do not have a photo ID in 2 years. But it's.
Well,
rather than get into 2 years, it's going to just confuse people because they're going to think that it's this time. So we'll just leave it at that. Right. For November, you bring an ID or you.
Yeah, but as a policy question, Mr. Secretary, do you object to the basic premise that voters should have to prove they are who they say they are and live where they say they live to know that they're qualified to vote in that place?
I don't object to that. What I had said to the legislature as my personal opinion on this issue is that I would like to find a way, I would like them to consider and try to come up with a way that no person who actually showed up at a polling place would be told to go back to wherever they were and not cast a ballot. Come up with a way to have a system that would not have that be the result. So they came up with an idea of having provisional ballots. that you could cast a provisional ballot, and then you would have 3 days to show that you actually. And there were a number of problems. As the more people look into that, we can't extend our elections for 3 days because our Constitution says the ballots need to be counted and finished before they leave that polling place. So they come up with the idea of a photograph. That we could have a digital camera. We estimated it might cost between $50 and $75 a polling place with a disc, $300, and you sign the affidavit and take a picture. And someone may come up with some better idea, but the bottom line was that we would come up with something that did not send anyone home,
unless they should be sent home because they aren't who they say they are. I'll be gratuitous in that. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us here this morning on Girard at Large. You have enlightened us.